Hi, this is Phil and Priscilla Fretwell here with Savage Marriage.
We're going to talk about how God is healing and restoring marriages today from betrayal, addictions, and the wounds of their past.
And what He did in our marriage, He can do in yours too.
Well, I'm in the studio today with a very special person, and it's my oldest daughter, Sarah McCargue.
Hello, everybody.
So Sarah and I were just sitting here. We had just recorded part of our book where she wrote her testimony about what she experienced 5 years ago when I came clean with Mom. And we were talking. She said, "Hey, let's do a podcast." And I said, "What are you going to do it on?" She goes, "How to talk to your kids about sex." I said, "Let's talk about this because this is something I think parents struggle with."
Yeah, it can be awkward at times. My kids aren't old enough. I mean, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, so not quite there yet, but I have listened to some different podcasts and read some material on it, but I definitely have my own views on it too.
Yeah. And so Sarah, introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners on your
Yeah,
marriage,
well-
your age, everything you've been doing.
So I am Phil and Priscilla's daughter, yes. I live in Atlanta with my husband. I have 2 daughters who are wonderful gifts. Their names are Eliana and Shalom, and they are 3.5 and 1, and I'm currently at home with them. Love being with them every day is literally a gift. So yeah, that's just a little bit about myself.
So when you were growing up here with Mom and me, I was asking you and talking to you a little bit. What do you remember about how we talked about sex growing up? You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I do think, I mean, as a parent, you can't ever do everything right. But one thing I feel like you guys did right was you guys introduced us to the idea of sex from an early age and in a very age appropriate way. I remember there were some books that Mom read to us, and it was like a series of books. Like I think the youngest one was for like 5-year-olds. I feel like we read like a different one when we were like 7, and maybe like another one when we were 10. I can't remember, the details were fuzzy, but I do remember thinking to myself as a 12-year-old being like, man, I feel like I've always known about sex. I don't feel like there's been like that's where babies come from, like moment. It was just like, no, I've always known this. And so, yeah, I feel like that was something that was done right, is that when I was first told about it, I was just told about it in a very simple but clear. There was no stork. There was no, well, it's just all the love that spills over and makes a baby. It wasn't any kind of ambiguous term. It was like, nope, a man puts his penis in a vagina and that's how a baby's made. And I was like, huh, okay, does that hurt? And then just kind of like, and like, no, it doesn't hurt. It feels good. Okay, like if that's what you say, and I remember just kind of like hearing that from a young age. And I also remember, my parents sharing about like how God designed it. They designed for like, a mom and a dad, a husband and a wife to come together and to make a family. And that being kind of my first exposure, thankfully, from my parents, thankfully at an age appropriate way, thankfully in a way that like God designed it, versus hearing from a friend or hearing from the TV or hearing from whatever. But that was kind of my first exposure to learning about sex, which I think was a great one. I'm really thankful for it.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like you knew more than your friends or knew it indifferent? Do you ever remember anything popping up like that?
I don't remember talking to my peers much about it. I remember being older, like 12 to 14, and girls like talking a lot about like guys being cute, but conversation of sex or having sex like never came up with my friend group.
And we should probably describe your school
yeah,
experience.
I mean,
right?
I went to a very small like private Christian school, and I wasn't even there full time. I was there just 2 or 3 days a week. So most of my growing up was actually not spent with peers of my age. It was more balanced, like 50% of my time maybe with peers, 50% of my time with my parents. So a little bit of balance there.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe not in a position to hear a lot
As
of the
much.
things,
Mhm.
that kids are hearing today. Yeah. Well, one thing I wondered when you were when we were talking earlier about this, you mentioned that I read some books with Tim. Tim is our oldest child, our son, our firstborn son. And you remember I read some books to him, and you said that Mom was reading some books to you. And I've wondered, I know that's a typical thing. The guys deal with the sons and the wives deal with the daughters. But I've second guessed that a little bit, if that creates a little bit of a taboo that you can't talk? I mean, what do you think about that?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts about this, but not to get too tangential here, but like I feel like even in church, when there's like men groups and women's groups for things, it automatically produces a culture of shame. Like, why can't the other group hear? Like,
Yes.
as if they don't have this same sin, like
Mhm.
whatever. But anyways, to bring it back down to a kid level, I do feel like it does create a sense of like taboo, or like girls can't hear about this or boys can't hear about this. It's like, why not? Like, at some point, like, I feel like boys should know that there's a menstrual cycle. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like, why shouldn't they know? At some point, they're going to have, like, a wife, or maybe just a friend, or like whatever. Like, don't create taboo around it. Talk about it. Like, they should know about that,
Yeah.
Or I don't even think I understood what an erection was until way later in life, and being
Yeah.
like, what? That happens? Just kind of being like, why didn't I know about this?
Yeah.
I think honestly, it was in college. This doesn't sound really terrible. It was in college in my psychology book. I was reading, like, they were talking about like the psychology of like a sexual arousal experience,
Uh-huh.
and I was just like, what? That's what happens? And
Yeah.
I mean, in a very scientific way, but I was just shocked
Yeah.
because that's not what the little books when I was a kid told me
So
about.
apparently the little books were missing a key
A key detail. Yeah.
a key detail on this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is really interesting on how to do that.
Yeah.
I think parents wrestle with us.
For sure.
And I think part of it is their own shame that they have felt with in the sexual area.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
so that infiltrates, takes over their interactions with their kids, and doesn't allow them to be honest
Mm-hmm.
and open and transparent about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, when you think about your child, hopefully your child hasn't had any, like, at 9 years old or 8 years old, hasn't had any other negative or outside experiences at that point. So you literally are the only and first, hopefully, input for your child. So why would you want to impart any kind of shame or taboo around the topic?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus just stating things clearly.
Well, interesting, when we talk to men and women today that have dealt with a porn usage problem or something like that, many of them mention that the first porn they saw was 9 or 10 years old, which it is pretty close to what you hear in national studies today, which is very sad. But it points to the fact that when we're talking with our children about sex, we got to start before 9 or 10. Now, you think that mom was reading these books to you when you were
like 5, I think, was the first book. Yeah.
It was super simple and age appropriate.
Yes, very much.
And that's what I remember as well. What would you have thought if I was also sitting there with you and reading the book to you?
I think that would have been hugely impactful. I mean, mom was a stay-at-home mom, so she had more time with us than you did. But I do think it would have been a very different atmosphere. Or even if you had told me as I got older, like, what it meant. I don't know. I had no perspective on the male perspective of sex.
Yeah.
All of, most of it was told secondhand to me through mom. Like, mom would tell me, like, oh, like, guys are very visual. I'm like, what does that even mean? I had no clue. And you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what that means. You keep saying these words. And I think if you had been able to share more, of like your perspective or your thoughts around sex to me, without it just being like a don't do that kind of a thing until you're married, it would have been hugely impactful, I think.
I hear a lot of a couple is describing a problem that they have had with a son. And they've caught their son watching porn or whatever it is. And he's, 10 or 11, 12 years old. And so the dad now goes and talks to the son, right?
Yep.
And sometimes the son will say, I don't want mom to know this. Right. And the dad will reinforce, well, this is just us guys are going to talk about this.
Right.
What do you think what kind of message is that sending?
I think something that's happening there is that the son is probably realizing deep down that he has sinned against woman.
Yeah.
And so therefore he doesn't want woman to know, But the truth is I think the mom could be a huge vessel of like healing and grace in that moment.
Yeah.
To be like, no, like this, I'm for you.
Right.
I'm for you. I'm for your heart. I'm for your mind. Like, let me be an agent of grace and healing in your life versus like seeing me as like someone you've wronged, even though like you have, like,
right.
You know what I'm saying? Like you have, but like, let me be grace to you, And I feel like often, I think when moms, see that their son is using porn, there's the temptation there to be the voice of judgment and the voice of accusation.
Right.
But I really think it's super powerful when women can actually come in and be the voice of grace and be the voice of faith and their son or their husband or their brother's life, I think it could have been hugely impactful for a mom to be a part of it, instead of it just being this taboo, like only men deal with this kind of a thing.
Right. I've wondered if that one little thing is actually creating some patterns in men's lives that when they run into a sexual problem,
Don't
tell anybody.
Mhm.
Don't tell your wife. Don't
Mhm.
tell your mom.
Mhm.
Right. And so that's one of the reasons that the men's accountability groups tend to flourish,
Mhm.
because now you're creating this quote safe environment where I can tell my friends, although you didn't sin against your friends.
Right.
So,
Right.
your sin does not impact your friends like it impacts your wife.
Yeah.
And so we always push forward and say, hey, this stuff's got to come out.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I remember Sean is my husband, and we often talk about, like, man, like, what do single people do who like have a problem with pornography? And I'm like, I'll tell you what, like, I would fight hard for any of my single friends. And if like mom wasn't available, like, I would fight hard for my brothers.
Yeah.
I really would. And I would fight really hard for my son if I had one. I would not hold anything back. I really wouldn't. So like, so don't underestimate woman and her ability to show grace and her ability to fight, because she will fight harder than anyone,
Amen. Yeah.
So
yeah, that's so true, Sarah. And I think about our own experience with mom and me. She fought for me.
Mhm.
She fought for me, continues to fight for me.
Yeah.
And she would fight for you and
Yeah.
Tim and Michael and
Uh-huh.
Anna Hope and Becca and and everything.
Yeah.
She stands in the gap for that, right?
Yeah, and I think there's something especially special of like a mother's heart, that there's something that grows in your heart as you become a mom, to like it just enlarges your heart to be able to just like take everyone in and like fight for them, like mama bear instincts, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's like, thankfully, you're not the enemy. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the devil's the enemy. The flesh and blood's not the enemy. It's the powers and the rulers and the principalities of darkness that are our enemy. And it's like, if you can keep that right sight in mind, it's like, okay, well, I know how to fight that. So
Amen.
I just really think it's such a work of the enemy, honestly, to separate women out of this battle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think we've talked about two important things so far. We said start early,
Mhm.
right? Let's get the discussion going.
Yeah.
And age appropriate, of course,
Yeah.
right? But also bring the husband and
the
the wife
together for
into
both
the conversation.
for both the boys and for the girls. I think
Right.
it'd be super, super profound.
Right. So what's a third area you think that we should focus on?
I think the third area is to really watch your language around how you describe sex. And I think the Holy Spirit would guide you in this. But like, I think there in our culture, it's really easy to start painting sex, and like I like to call it like a donut. It's like a sweet treat that you can have, but you can't have it right now. You know what I mean? It's like, nope, you can't cheat on, you can't get the donut. You know what I mean? And it's like, come on, we all know that if the donut is there, we all want the donut. And so it's like when we start talking about sex, it's just something good to enjoy, which it is something good to enjoy. But like, when we start talking about it in those terms, it loses its value. And I feel like what you guys talk about in terms of sexual intimacy flourishing with spiritual intimacy, and how those two things are super tied together, I think that paints sex as a more worshipful experience with our God versus just each other. And it doesn't just become a donut anymore. It's an experience with the Lord that also feels good.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like, oh, okay. Like now it's not like, let me just go eat this donut. It's like, oh, do I want to come, like, think about like back in the old times when the priest had to come into the holy, the place of holies. Like, do I want to go in there wrongly? Like,
Right.
no, I do not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I want to go in there rightly to this experience with the Lord. And so like when you're painting the picture like that,
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to like think about like, oh, do I want to actually have premarital sex right now? Or do I
Yeah.
want to have sex outside of what it should be? It's like, no, because this is actually something that's worshipful.
Yeah. So in other words, it's not that you shouldn't eat the donut now. It's that you can't really even experience the donut.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's like you can't even taste it if you were to have it.
That's
Like
right.
that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of people bite the donut, right? They take the donut and they settle for the donut. That's not even really, I mean, God has a cream-filled, sprinkled, covered, delicious donut. But today, it's not like that.
Yeah. And then people eat this donut and they're like, this isn't that great.
Yeah.
Why isn't this that great? And it's like, well, you're eating the stale one that's been out for 4 months.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like not the same thing. You can't compare it, you know?
That's right. And so, so describing it as a wonderful experience, you just are not positioned to have it. You can have a sexual feeling,
Mm-hmm.
but as far as having the spiritual, emotional, and physical piece, the only place you're really going to be able to have that is in a marriage.
Right. Right.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's really good. And I think trying to describe that to our children in that way helps put them in a position that we're not just saying, no, 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 don't eat the sweet donut.
Yeah.
We're just saying, hey, the donut's not as sweet as it's going to be later.
Right.
And you don't want to spoil it.
Right. And I also think as much as parents could be transparent with their children about their own terrible donut experiences would be helpful. You know what I mean? Just kind of being like, where it's like, you know, hey, this is what I did as a kid. And let me tell you, it does not compare to like what I've experienced now. You know what I mean? Or let me tell you like how I believed this lie. And this is a lie that I believed. And I bought the lie and I went and I had sex here and I did this. And it just was not what I thought. And it created this baggage or like whatever it is, just being super transparent with your children, I think would be hugely helpful. I feel like you guys have said once before where it's like, you hide your baggage, hoping that your kids don't have the same baggage, but then it's like, then they have the same baggage. So if you're just honest, it can save them a lot of baggage, you know?
Yeah. You know, it is really interesting that particular topic on, do you share what happened to you?
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, all this stuff is age appropriate, right? With your kids. But I remember mom talking to a woman, and she was deathly afraid that her daughter was going to be sexually promiscuous because she was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And mom asked her, did you share that with your daughter? And she was like aghast. No, I would never share that. I don't want her to do the same thing. And it's really not like that. You share it from a place of brokenness. That you say, this is what this did to me.
Mm-hmm.
This set me on a wrong path. And I don't want you to experience the hurt that I had, you know, and it's a different way of doing it. And I know even when we talk to couples and they go through our story and read our book and everything, and they are, many of them are shocked that we laid all this out for all you guys,
Yeah,
you know, and I know it was shocking for you guys, but it did something in your lives as well.
Yeah. Something great.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like,
that's true.
not just like ruined us and made us like miserable, like actually significantly impacted not just our marriage, but our spiritual trajectory, like 100% in such a beautiful way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's right. It's always such a fear for parents to go back and unpack their problems and their issues. But I think our kids need to understand us as parents, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that you can think of, Sarah, with your kids or grandchildren that you would do different, and you would say, I don't want them to experience this, or it might be something you've observed in the culture, you know, that you want to make sure you don't do.
The only thing that came to mind was we've been really intentional with our girls about practicing consent from like a really early age. And just like they have agency over their bodies. They have the ability to tell people no. They get to do when it comes to their bodies, like if they don't want to hug someone, they don't have to hug somebody. Like my older one is not much of a hugger cuddler. My younger one will go to anyone and cuddle, and just kind of like, they're just two different people, and that's what they want to do with their body. And so we tell them, like, if you don't want to, you know, hug or kiss or whoever, you don't have to, but you have to be polite and say goodbye, or you have to be polite and say hello, but you don't have to give them a hug. And I think that kind of consent, practicing consent, goes on later when, like, in our culture, you know, there's this whole transactional thing where, like, if a man treats you to a date, you have to give them a physical favor. And it's like, no, you actually don't have to. You don't owe them anything, you know? And just to have that kind of like agency and empowerment over their bodies, just because it's theirs and they get to choose to do what they want with it. So, anyways, that's the only thing that came to mind that I feel like I've been intentional in trying to do with my girls so far.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Yeah, I've noticed with them, like Ellie, your oldest, right? Many times she goes, hey, you want to give us a hug goodnight? No, and she hangs her head and looks down, right? And so we've known where your posture is on that, and we've not forced that issue, right? It's just because she can do with her body what she feels comfortable doing with her body,
Mhm.
right? And nobody should be able to force her to do something that she
Right.
doesn't really want to do.
Mm-hmm. And when she does give you a hug, you're like, oh, you really wanted to.
That's right.
It's like really
Yeah.
genuine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's
super
right.
sweet.
That's right. What do you think about inviting Mom into the studio here to get her thoughts on this whole topic?
Yeah, let's bring her in. She's the one who read the books and answered our hard questions as kids. So
All right. Well, Priscilla, welcome into the conversation here. You've been listening to all this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you guys have had an awesome time speaking and talking about a tough subject. And but you answered a lot of questions, and I thought it was really good.
So, in our situation, our kids were kind of in two waves, right?
Right.
Because
We have
Tim
the
and
older
Sarah,
set and
yep.
and the younger set.
And so Tim, Sarah, and Michael are all married right now, but then Anna, Hope, and Becca are 16 and 14. So what would you say is different about the way we're talking to our kids about sexuality now with Anna, Hope, and Becca versus our older kids?
Okay. I think the thing that we did the same was we spoke to them about sex and sexuality, how babies are made and all that stuff that goes with it, with our girls also. And today, the difference that I see is that Anna, Hope, and Becca have no shame in talking about their sexuality, asking questions, or even sharing some things that they heard or seen and wanting to know more about it. It's a very open thing. Even talking about their menstrual cycle is not a big deal, and they
Mhm.
do it in front of you.
Yeah, I think that is different because I don't know that Sarah.
yeah,
you
that
would've
was
had
not
that,
my
right?
experience at all. I remember having a lot of shame around that. Gosh, I couldn't even buy any pads at the store. I had to send Mom for me. Didn't want anyone to know I had a period. Oh my gosh. Even though literally every woman in the world has one, but not me. Oh no, So yeah, very different experience, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think that whole thing that Sarah, you and I talked about with the husband, the father should be involved. It's pretty open right now. But, part of that's come, frankly, from
your openness.
our own openness and being willing to share, right? Because I don't know that our kids can ever be expected to be more open and transparent than we are.
Mhm.
That's right. And they have heard you share your heart and some of the things that you've walked through, and so they're willing to share.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So did you use the books with the girls?
I did.
Okay.
I did not go through all the books.
Okay.
I think I went through book 1 and 2 with
Okay.
them.
Yeah. So I guess the only difference is just that you were more present the second time around, Dad. Is that right?
Yeah, but I mean, you were still going through those before I came clean with you.
That's right.
And so I was probably a little bit of the same situation, right? This is Mom's job. And frankly, I think part of that from a guy's standpoint is I was dealing with my own level of shame and sexual shame and sin.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like you don't want to, there's something inside of you that just says, I'm not worthy to talk to my kids about this.
Yeah.
I'll let Mom do it. Because the more I stand there and tell them things about sexual purity and all this type of stuff, I'm such a big hypocrite.
Yeah, that would have been true. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so it feels so terrible. And I think there's a lot of guys in that situation
Yeah.
that having the discussion is so hypocritical, they just can't have it.
Mm. Wow. You know what's interesting? What popped into my mind is, like when the Lord does something, he does it not just for you, but to also multiply it to somebody else.
Yeah.
I feel like the enemy does the opposite. It's like when he keeps you in shame, it also multiplies to somebody else. You know what I
Yes.
mean? And that's kind of what we experienced. It's like you were having your own shame and issues and problems, and then it kind of imparted to us. You know what I'm saying? Like I had this shame around my own, menstrual cycle or sexual. I can't talk to my parents about this. You know what I mean? Versus with the girls, you were a lot more open, and the freedom of no shame has imparted to them. And now they don't have the shame or the barriers of talking to you guys,
Right.
So it's cool how the Lord uses things like that.
Yeah. I mean, they brought up to us very personal things.
Yes, they have.
Dealing with sexuality and everything. And I mean, people that would come in and listen to our conversations around our table would be shocked.
Yeah.
I think. And we talk about it pretty nonchalantly.
Yeah.
Not that it's not important. It's just that it doesn't carry any shame with it.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. I remember when Sean and I were dating, and I remember one time, Mama, you asked me, you're like, has he touched your butt? And I was like, taken aback by that. And I was like,
I don't remember that.
I remember this. And I'm like, I am not going to, first of all, be honest. And number one. Number two, this woman is full of judgment. And I am definitely not going to tell her the truth on this.
And
you know what I'm saying?
And I was full
And
of
you
judgment.
were. Yeah. But like my point in that is versus where you guys are now, the girls know that you are battle partners and the girls know that you would fight for them and not project shame towards them or judgment towards them, but they know that you would fight for them.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I think it's just really cool, the difference. It's cool for me, even as your older kid now, to see the difference that makes. How like the judgment and all that, what that produced in me as your child, you know what I mean? Versus the freedom and the transparency and what that can produce in your second set, you know what I mean? And my sisters. So that's really cool.
Yeah, that is. Anything else, Priscilla, that hit you as you were listening through, or thoughts?
I think that point that you shared about mothers and sisters and daughters fighting for the people they know, you know, the brothers and the dads and just the single people out there, and wanting to come alongside and say, I'm here in this battle with you, was just beautiful.
Yeah.
It really was. And I think that the women that I have come across are women who want to fight. You know, they are strong, bold, and courageous women who will take a stand and say, I'm here for you. And I think we need to stand with our men, right? Men in our lives, and say, it's okay. You know, we're not judging you, but we know that there's hope and there's healing for this.
Yeah.
And you're going to get through it. You're going to get through it because God is our rescuer.
Amen.
And he will rescue you out of your mess.
Amen. I really think we can get so distracted by, I'll say, like the secondary battle versus the primary battle for unity. And so it's like in these things where like, okay, fathers are going to talk to the sons and the mothers will talk to the daughters. Like that is like division in a way versus like the whole family binding together. You know what I mean? And I feel like it's almost a battle that has gone unnoticed. You know what I'm saying? It's been so deceptive that it's gone just completely unnoticed. And I really feel like the fight for unity within the marriage, within the family, in the spiritual fight for unity, you know what I mean? It's just so huge. And I was talking to a friend the other day. She was struggling being her husband's battle partner. And I was like, if your husband stopped looking at porn today, you would still have to fight for unity. Because there's other things that are happening. You know what I mean? Like, that's not his only sin. You know what I'm saying? You're going to still have to fight together on something else. So stop getting wrapped up in the porn. That's the secondary battle. You know what I'm saying? Fight for the unity. Fight for the unity of your marriage. Fight for the unity of your family. And don't let it just go unnoticed that, like, you've divided off, you know?
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think women play a pivotal role in that. But I think it's, you know, a whole thing.
Hits so many other different things.
Yeah.
Well, this has been just so great, Sarah, having you with us and, you know, being able to see what God is doing in your life and seeing the way you can share and express your heart and your insight and your wisdom. And we really, really appreciate it. We admire you a lot.
Oh, I love you guys.
We love you.
And hopefully next time you're in town and I ask you, what are you going to do a podcast on? You'll have the next topic.
Who knows? Thanks for having me.
This is Phil and Priscilla Fretwell. Thanks for listening. Our book, Savage Marriage: Triumph Over Betrayal and Sexual Addiction, is now available on Amazon.
Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Savage Marriage Ministries. Also, join our Savage Marriage community at savagemarriageministries.com.
And remember, it's God who is at work in your savage adventure.